Without Rizzo in that news headline, they can't sell him in this town. I'm good copy.
Give me another kiss. Come on. Kiss, Daddy. Hold me a kiss. Come on.
They'll never forget me when I leave, and there'll never be another one like me.
Channel 10 News is proud to present to you a look back at the life and times of a man who changed the history of Philadelphia. These are the Rizzo years.
Good evening. He seemed like he would go on living forever, Frank L. Rizzo, but tonight he's dead at the age of 70 from a massive heart attack.
Frank Rizzo died today. He was pronounced dead at 2:12 p.m.
It was an event that shocked millions of people. And even today, it's hard to believe Frank Rizzo is really gone. From his early days as police officer to police commissioner and 2 terms as mayor, Frank L. Rizzo left an indelible mark on the city of Philadelphia. Channel 10's Harvey Clark begins our special look back at the Rizzo years.
He was one of 4 sons of a policeman to become a cop himself. He rode the changing social tides to the top as the city's first Italian-American police commissioner and mayor. Rizzo, the Cisco Kid, Geronimo as he was called on the streets, rose to fame out of the rubble of the Columbia Avenue riots in 1964. Looting, vandalism, police sweeps, and roundups. Nightstick violence, busted heads, broken faces, Philadelphia's first flash of racial unrest.
That was an era of confrontation. Frank Rizzo wasn't the police chief of Los Angeles when they burned Watts down. Frank Rizzo wasn't the police chief or mayor in New York when that burned to the ground. That was an era of confrontation. I'll tell you where Frank Rizzo was. Frank Rizzo was either the deputy commissioner, or mayor of Philadelphia. Nobody died. Nobody died. Nobody burned Philadelphia down.
The Rizzo political script was set.
When they begin to charge us, when they begin to throw stuff, we're going to take them on. Yes.
It would run for a quarter of a century. To some, Frank Rizzo stood for protection. For others, oppression. 1969, Rizzo arrives in a tuxedo, nightstick in his cummerbund, to control a black and white street rumble in Gray's Ferry. The picture made front pages around the nation. Next year, next national front page. Suspected Black Panthers were ordered stripped in a weapons raid after 8 cops were shot and 1 killed in one bloody Philadelphia week. By now, the once Republican Rizzo, the tough cop, now a Democrat, was on the make for City Hall. In a row house campaign, the lawman, the protector, whipped Bill Green, Jr., son of the builder of the city's powerful Democratic machine. Rizzo overpowered that machine. Rizzo pulled Democrats and Republicans together as his own, the Rizzocrats, and Rizzo had won.
I pledge you this. This administration will do everything humanly possible to see to it that anyone will be able to operate a business without fear.
City Hall was unpredictable under Frank Rizzo's command. 1972, Democratic mayor supports Republican Richard Nixon for president. 1973, Rizzo flunks lie detector tests over suspect city contract deals. 1975, Rizzo falls and breaks his hip at an Arco fire. And in 1976, Rizzo wins City Hall a second time and decides to change the city charter to allow a 3rd term. But the mood in Philadelphia was changing.
Blacks are going to vote black.
So you say in response?
That I say in response, the whites will vote for Rizzo along with many other blacks that think like I do.
The Rizzo tide turned. His charter fight went down 2-1.
That moldy group that look like they need a bath, the day that they control this city or the country, then we're in trouble. They're a bunch of radicals.
In August 1978, Rizzo moved on move. Police enforced an eviction order, confronted the radical compound with water. A police rush. Gunfire. Officer James Ramp is killed and police turn on move leader Delbert Africa, beating and kicking him. The next year, Rizzo leaves office to rest and walk his dog, but he then abandons retirement to take on Wilson Good, and the rising black power base in the 1983 Democratic primary. Rizzo loses, and blacks have the added passion of putting one of their own in City Hall. "1985, Move makes an historic mark on the first black mayor. Wilson Goode moves on Move. Police enforce an eviction order, confront the compound. A bombing, a fire, 11 people die. Frank Rizzo, sensing a weakened Goode and still in love with City Hall, decides to make a fourth try for the top job, but this time as a Republican. It's been a biting battle.
He wants you to forget about the Move tragedy.
He tore our city apart once.
Changing social ties that once favored Frank Rizzo and rocketed him to top cop, king of City Hall, now run against him in vast parts of Philadelphia. Rizzo, a grandfather now, said it will be the last time.
I am only going to seek election for one term, 4 years. And then I will retire to my home with my family, my wife, my children, my grandson, and my dog and parrot.
And the night before that 1987 election, Frank Rizzo repeats a ritual he's carried out before every election. He returns to his old neighborhood in South Philadelphia. Channel 10's Dennis Waltering goes along with Rizzo as he meets his people on Rosewood Street.
I'm telling you that I know I can bring back the leadership qualities that are necessary to make this city work again.
Former Mayor Frank Rizzo came home tonight. Came back to the South Philadelphia neighborhood where he grew up to hold an election eve rally. He's done this before every one of his elections for good luck. And tonight, another fighter joined him.
A great fighter, a great human being, Joe Frazier.
The former heavyweight boxing champ says he's supporting Rizzo because the streets aren't safe anymore.
I believe in law and order. I believe in fairness. I think this man's a very good, fair man. And I think I'd like to see this city make a change again.
At a corner bar, Rizzo shares a toast for victory. Up the street, Rizzo visits the house where he was born and grew up.
Thank you.
Frank Rizzo says one reason he keeps coming back here is because this neighborhood represents a lot of what he's all about. Old values and strong family ties.
The family structure, that's where it is. And this is what made this country great.
I think he's the man for the city. And I think he can do a real good job. He's done it before, and he can do it again.
Tony O'Terry grew up with Rizzo. Jimmy Davis says he just wants to feel proud again.
I grew up hearing Frank Rizzo and felt proud, just hearing his name growing up through it, and felt like the city was so important to live in.
Thank you. You take care.
Rizzo wins the primary, but in November, in a down-to-the-wire finish, he loses the general election to Wilson Goode by just 17,000 votes. In a fiery speech to his supporters that night, he refuses to give up.
Let me tell you, he ought to be ashamed of himself. We're not done yet, and we're not. And let me tell you something, so you'll understand. I will never concede to him, okay?
He never gave up, and that's what I really admire the most about the man. He was in the arena. He was always in the arena, and he'd get bloodied, and he'd get knocked down, but the guy had tremendous courage and guts, and he got back up every time.
After his heartbreaking loss to Wilson Goode in 1987, Frank Rizzo's life enters a new phase as radio talk show host.
WCAU News Talk time is 5:57. I'm Frank Rizzo, and you can call me from Philadelphia or the suburbs at 839-1210.
The program, Frank Talk, and Frank it was, doing verbal battle with the liberals who called in.
And then I watched the liberals that rush forward to help the criminals, but never the victims of crime.
That's an exaggeration.
No, it isn't an exaggeration. I believe that, or I wouldn't say it.
Critics claim Rizzo's getting a free platform from which to launch his next political campaign, and Wilson Goode an easy target.
I just can't believe, Hank, what's happening to a great
I know
city.
it's really
the streets are filthy, no services, no police services. It's just an outrage.
But the broadcasting business can be just as fickle as politics, and when WCAU-AM changes to an oldies format in 1990, Frank Rizzo loses his talk show. What else to do but plan another run for mayor? On a Channel 10 News Forum program in early 1991, I asked Rizzo why, after serving 2 terms as mayor, he's willing to go through the stress of another campaign without the endorsement of the Republican Party.
First of all, I love Philadelphia. And I know that I can provide the leadership to make it work. It was a good town when I was around. Not perfect, but a good town.
But you were on the radio, you had a platform, you had, I mean, you know, you're very well known, you know, why this grief at this point? This is a hard job.
Not grief. By the way, you talked about my age. Now, that's something else. The press, every time they report me, they say the 70-year-old Rizzo. I look better than some of these guys half my age.
Well, let me rephrase that. Why would somebody who has a comfortable retirement with all kinds of other opportunities seek to be mayor of Philadelphia again?
Because I love Philadelphia and I know I can make it work.
And looking at the city, who would you vote for? Who would you want for mayor of the current
I'll save that so you can put that in your political notebook later on.
You don't want to tell me now. I mean, you don't have a favorite among the other group.
No, I'm just going to keep that one to myself and we'll talk about it later. And by the way, you talked about our relationship. I made you a star, Larry.
You think so?
Sure.
You really think so?
Yes, I did.
Thanks for joining us. As you can see, Frank Rizzo loved to give me a hard time, always, though, in an affectionate way. It was an example of the warmth the man had for other people.
Primary Election Day 1991, Frank Rizzo remains an underdog in the Republican race against Ron Castile and Sam Katz. The voting ends, and then the tense wait for results begins. Channel 10's Bill Baldini takes us behind the scenes with the Rizzo family and their supporters as the votes come in, and Frank Rizzo clings to a narrow lead over Castile.
We're up by 9 tenths of a point
instead of 8.
But how much is that?
When the polls closed, the action began to heat up inside Rizzo headquarters. Rizzo's family and supporters clustering in small groups, their hopes rising and falling with each election return.
93 for Rizzo, 78 for Castile, 65 for Katz.
That's the Northeast where they're supposed to have their stronghold. I told you, Billy.
You told me. That's only a quarter of none.
Billy, we'll wait and see, but I knew that I had reached a lot of people.
This is the so-called back room. It was filled with people, but no smoke, no deals, just excitement.
In some of the Northeast wards, we should be losing or winning.
Well, I got my victory speech already written. That's how concerned I am.
Do you have a speech in case you lose?
Don't have to have one because I'm not going to lose.
Frank Rizzo was the calmest person in the room. Even his wife Carmela and daughter Joanna showed more concern than Rizzo.
And you're winning in some wards 5-1 and 6-1 in some divisions.
Civil liberties, what did I tell you?
It's going to be close. 75 to 80 in.
The margin with 88% in is approximately 960 votes.
You better get that South Philadelphia division and go call it now.
Now.
Hey!
We're holding.
It's like when you have a fever of 104 and 105 and you're dying and the fever breaks. Yeah. Right? The fever broke. We beat him now.
We beat him.
Frank Rizzo looked at his favorite picture and declared there was never a doubt. All was well with the world. He won. Bill Baldini, Channel 10 News.
And amazingly, Frank Rizzo, running without party backing, defeats Ron Castile by a mere 1,400 votes. He becomes the Republican nominee for mayor, and he thanks his supporters, his booming voice now hoarse from the strain of the final moments of the campaign.
The political battles we have fought over the last few months will soon be forgotten. The joy we share tonight will soon be a faded memory. But what won't be forgotten is the spirit of a campaign waged not for the political career of one man, but for the future of an entire city.
A tumultuous day and night in the history of the city of Philadelphia. Former Mayor Frank L. Rizzo died in his office today, collapsed of a massive heart attack and died shortly after 2 o'clock this afternoon, Philadelphia time, at the age of 70.
We were going to have lunch. Usually he would eat in at his conference table unless there was an outside luncheon meeting. And, you know, his tuna fish sandwich was there. Everything was all set. And as usual, he goes into the washroom He was very fastidious, as you know, and combed his hair, washed his hands, made sure his coat was straight and his tie was straight. Immaculate person. And when he didn't come out after about 4 or 5 minutes, which was unusual because he was just going in to wash up, we went to the door, knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And when the door was opened, Frank was lying there on his back, completely dressed, just with his hands down at his side, and he was, it looked to me that he was dead at that point, that it was just a massive, immediate heart attack because his color was terrible. He was just gray, and he just looked like there was no life in there.
At 1:23, the call comes into Engine Company 24 in Center City, a rescue unit dispatched to the Rizzo campaign headquarters. 3 paramedics worked desperately to bring life back to Frank Rizzo, using a device over his mouth to try to pump air into his lungs, twice administering cardiac shock treatments to restart his heart, but all to no avail.
We did our best. It's a shame. We did everything we could do for him. He was a remarkable man in the city of Philadelphia. We went, a little bit beyond the call to continue as much as possible on the way, trying to revive him.
The paramedics bring Frank Rizzo here to the emergency entrance of Thomas Jefferson Medical Center, where doctors begin a race against time. Channel 10 medical reporter Sherry Bank takes us through the procedures used in the last desperate attempts to save Frank Rizzo's life.
During the last desperate minutes, fire rescue rushed Frank Rizzo into Jefferson's emergency department at 1:52 p.m., straight to the resuscitation room where these doctors and nurses used defibrillators, intravenous adrenaline, oxygen, an external pacemaker, and a massive dose of epinephrine injected directly into his heart. But they got no pulse, no heartbeat, and at 2:12, Dr. Allan Forstater pronounced Frank Rizzo dead.
Do you think that Mr. Rizzo was dead the minute he collapsed and hit the floor?
No question.
And so the chances of resuscitating him were almost what? None?
Minimal to none.
But you tried everything anyway.
Absolutely.
Doctors here say they have to assume that Frank Rizzo had some underlying form of heart disease that made his heart suddenly stop beating. The things that could have put him at risk for that include his age. He was 70. He weighed 250 pounds. His father apparently died of some kind of heart problem, and he was a diabetic dependent on insulin. All of that had Rizzo's personal physician concerned.
I always worried about him. I worried
Why?
about him for 10 years.
Why?
Because I know him well, and because he was diabetic, and because he worked very hard.
But you didn't think that he was at risk of dying, did you?
No.
But just last week, journalists noticed the former mayor out of breath. And during the mayoral debates, others noticed him wheezing.
In Harrisburg to get the funds that we need. We just can't.
One doctor told us off the record Rizzo complained of chest pain, but possibly Frank Rizzo thought he was as invincible as he was memorable.
They'll never forget me when I leave, and there'll never be another one like me.
Sherry Bank, Channel 10 News.
Within minutes of his passing, the news of Frank Rizzo's death rocks Philadelphia. His family is stunned. The first family member to arrive here at the hospital is former fire commissioner and younger brother Joe Rizzo.
Well, you know, in Italian families, the older brother is always like a father, and even today, at my age, Frank was still telling me what to do. But he was a good man. He had a big heart. He always tried to help people. And someone made a real nice comment today that part of Philadelphia died with him.
This is Meg Grant. There's an attempt at normalcy in the Rizzo household, a ball game on the lawn for 9-year-old Joseph Francis. Francis after his famous grandfather. And of course his grandfather was famous, so the stream of friends continues unabated. Friends and flowers, fancy florists' arrangements, and gladiolus from the garden. This wish to pay your last respects, to say goodbye, I suppose, is felt all across the city. And so Police Commissioner Willie Williams spent the morning planning crowd and traffic control for the viewing and funeral.
You'll have thousands just from within the police community alone, current and former. So over the 2 days, 5 to 10 to 15,000 people will not be unexpected.
No huge crowd this morning, though, at the Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul, where the viewing and funeral mass will be held. Just the very devoted at 7 a.m. and Monsignor James Howard, who spoke not only of his friend Frank Rizzo, but also of his widow, Carmela, and the happy years of their marriage.
She's the one that's responsible for him making it. And for many years to come, her strength will be the fact that she gave so much to her husband.
Everyone has memories. Willie Williams has memories and a philosophy of police work inherited from the top cop himself.
Believe in yourselves, conduct yourselves as winners, try to stay on top, and do an honest job.
For the people who dedicated their lives to getting Frank Rizzo elected as mayor of this city, his death was a crushing blow. Channel 10's John Blunt reports now from Rizzo campaign headquarters.
Rizzo campaign workers shocked and dismayed at the loss of their leader, saying very little to the press. Jim Turner was a long-time Rizzo loyalist, his driver and aide going back to his police department days with Rizzo in 1954.
A big loss, and I'll tell you something else. I believe he could have done something to help this town, and he wanted to help some small people. That I know.
Frank Rizzo had made a campaign appearance before the black clergy, returning here to his office at noontime, where he collapsed.
You can't take anything away from Frank Rizzo. Everybody on the streets knew and had an opinion about him. It was the kind of recognition that a politician craved.
It was like when I first heard it, I said, no, this isn't right.
He was one of the few people from the city who was known nationally.
He was a great man. I think it would have been a great mayor.
Marty Weinberg, Rizzo's top political aide, had to rush back from Harrisburg.
And he said, I'm going to use the next campaign to make sure that the black community and the white community knows I was fair to everybody. And that's the reason he ran.
The Rizzo staff in shock. John Blunt, Channel 10 News.
From his early days on the police force as the Cisco Kid right through his days as police commissioner, Frank Rizzo was a legend in uniform. And every Philadelphia police officer knew that Frank Rizzo would defend the force against all enemies. He was a cop's cop, the general.
Frank Rizzo was following his father's footsteps when he became a policeman, and he quickly distinguished himself as a beat officer, as a highway patrolman, deputy commissioner, and no-nonsense police commissioner.
Frank Rizzo was a policeman for more than 20 years. He never forgot the people on the force, and those people never forgot him.
Well, the reaction is everybody feels they lost somebody pretty close to them.
Nobody is taking Frank Rizzo's death harder than the members of the Philadelphia police force.
He was a cop, he was a good, took no crap. They did the job right.
He was a friend in the department. When he was in office, he was always, you knew you could count on him.
All the policemen feel it's a tough job, and when you have somebody in your corner, you know, you try your hardest.
Frank Rizzo was counting on the police vote in his run for mayor, and the police were counting on him.
You know, no matter who gets in, it's not going to be an ex-police officer, not somebody who would understand what exactly goes on out here.
Frank L. Rizzo will be remembered as a lot of things. For Philadelphia's 6,000-person police force, he'll be remembered as a leader and as a friend. Terry Ruggles, Channel 10 News.
Change overnight, Lieutenant.
As far as I'm concerned, the police department was the best. We still have a great police department, but the men and women under Frank Rizzo knew that he cared. He cared about his men and women. And he wouldn't ask them to do any more than what he would have done himself. He made the police department. They were proud to be a police officer here in the city of Philadelphia.
They were all Rizzo's people, the police officers and firefighters from Southwest Philadelphia to the great Northeast. But South Philadelphia held a special magic for Frank Rizzo. It was his birthplace, and his passing hit very hard there. Channel 10's Luann Kahn talked with people in South Philadelphia the day Frank Rizzo died.
Some lit candles, others made a special trip to Rosewood Street, known in this part of town as Rizzo Street.
We were taking a walk to see the house, Rizzo's house, where he lived.
Frank Rizzo was like a father to me. He was a friend, a true friend, a genuine person.
Mike Reno considered himself Frank Rizzo's personal photographer. Why did you follow him? You have a car full of Rizzo pictures here.
Because he's a hero. I've been following him since I was a kid. And he always had an open door for the underdog. He was like a movie star. When people would see me, he was like a magnet. He would attract people.
He was a clean-cut boy he used to be an errand boy for our butcher around the corner.
91-year-old Ann Benetti remembers the child who grew up to be mayor and made the neighborhood proud. Neighbors gathered round her to watch the news they did not want to believe.
I'm shocked. I am really shocked over it. I'll never get over it.
Luann Kahn, Channel 10 News. Frank Rizzo grew up in South Philadelphia, and he grew to love the food and his friends at Palumbo's. Thank you. It was comfortable here with his trusted bartender Ronnie, his favorite waitress Josephine, and Al, a lifelong friend and chef. It was here, sitting amongst the legends in Palumbo's nostalgia room, Frank Rizzo enjoyed his last dinner Monday night.
People would jump up, shake his hand. He was marvelous. The whole room came alive when he came in.
Among the stars, there's a permanent space on the wall for a South Philly kid who made it big.
He said, oh, I'm great. He said, I feel good, Junior, good, just good. I said, you sure? Yeah, I'm fine. He said, how's the election going? I said, oh, no, it's in the bag. He said, we're going to win. We're going to win November. Oh, we have it.
He really watched what he ate. He did. He'd have broiled chicken with the skin taken off.
But Chef Al D'Angelo will tell anybody the Riz had a distinct desire for rigatoni.
We really loved his rigatonis with marinara sauce. He had to have that at least once a week.
What did you think when you heard the news, Al?
It was shocking. We cooked for him. He was here Monday night. We cooked for him, and Tuesday we couldn't believe it.
Yes, Frank Rizzo will be sorely missed here in South Philadelphia. Just take a look at Palumbo's marquee. Goodbye, Frank. You'll be missed, but you'll never be forgotten. In South Philadelphia, I'm Bonnie Keller, Channel 10 News.
On the day he died, Frank Rizzo had just met with a group of local black clergymen. He was trying to gain their support for his campaign. His often angry relationship with members of Philadelphia's African-American community had apparently begun to soften in recent years as the problem of drugs and black-on-black crime had rallied many towards his strong law and order campaign. Just after he died, I spoke with members of the African-American community about Frank Rizzo. On the streets of Philadelphia tonight, Rizzo's reaction was mixed in the black community. Some people liked him.
Frank was still a good man, and he will be missed.
Other people did not.
I had never voted for Frank. There's nothing I had against him, but I just never voted for him.
Admittedly, Frank Rizzo's past relationship with many Philadelphia African Americans was stormy at best. He was tough and feisty, no doubt about it. And that's why Ernie Hamilton, a product of the 70s drug wars, didn't like him.
Yeah, I knew him when he was a cop.
And your opinion of him then?
It's the same as now. I just don't care about it.
But he always spoke to Abe Ferguson and his friends on the street corner every morning, and that's why he did like him.
Since the man is not perfect and living in an imperfect world, he did do, and he helped a lot of people.
Including black people, you think?
Including black people.
Joe Everett didn't much care for Rizzo, but he did like his tough stand against drugs. And Elizabeth Valentine thought Rizzo had made a change for the better. And former mayoral candidate Lucien Blackwell said this.
As I talked to a lot of our people, they were saying, I'm voting for Rizzo. You know, and you wouldn't have gotten that 5 years ago.
I don't believe that Frank Rizzo in no way, shape, or form was a racist, and I think that it was overstated. No, I think there have been bad raps that were given to him, absolutely. Because I knew Frank Rizzo, and to know Frank Rizzo, you'd know he was no racist. No, he just cared about the people. He cared about law and order. He was there to protect the blacks as well as the whites.
My dad came from a law enforcement background. Just because of the position that he had, a cop, there were certain people that didn't like him. And it was unfortunate that they tried to turn many people that didn't really know my father, they tried to turn people against my father and use that racial thing to get people to dislike him. And there were a lot of people, I met little kids that were just 7, 8 years old, that somebody told them that he was a mean person. And 20 minutes after he met them or he would talk to them, and that was gone.
He was tough with a criminal element. And that's why I think sometimes
they cast him wrong regarding the Afro-American. If they had been Italians, he'd have been the same way. I mean, if they're criminal element, that's what he, you know. And a lot of people took that the wrong way.
2 days after Frank Rizzo dies, thousands of Philadelphians come here to the Cathedral Basilica St. Peter and Paul. It was a hot and humid summer night. Nevertheless, they stood in line to pay their last respects to Frank Rizzo. I was at the cathedral that night. The intense heat was too much for some of the people who stood here waiting to pay their respects, but they stay. The elderly make their way down the long line. People on crutches wait patiently. The blind move steadily. People of all ages wait through the dusk and into the darkness, even though many of them never met Frank Rizzo.
I've never met him personally, but all of my life I have heard about him and followed his work, and it's just like I knew him, but I never did meet him.
Al Talley has been in line for more than 3 hours. He never met Frank Rizzo, but he was touched by him.
And he helped get me a job, though, and I'm grateful for what he's done. I never shook his hands.
I've never met him, and taxi drivers and politicians all over the city have told me that you should meet the guy, and the whole reason I'm here is because I never met him. I always wanted to meet him.
When he was mayor, I just enjoyed walking the streets of Philadelphia, but since these last few years, it really hasn't been pleasant anymore, and so I attribute that to his influence or his spirit. Even tonight, as you can see around here, everything seems so peaceful and calm, and there's law and order here, you know? It must be something that's spiritual about him.
Geez, thousands of people told me how he touched them in some way. He was an amazing man, really.
The next morning, the largest public funeral in Philadelphia history held at the cathedral. It was an historic day in Philadelphia, the final farewell to Frank Rizzo.
Pray for our brother Frank, whose body we honor with Christian burial. Give him happiness with your saints, and raise up his body in glory at the last day to be in your presence forever. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever.
We would have you be clear about those who sleep in death, brothers. Otherwise, you might yield to grief, like those who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose, God will bring forth with him from the dead those also who have fallen asleep believing in him. We say to you, as if the Lord himself had said it, that we who live, who survive until his coming, will in no way have an advantage over those who have fallen asleep. No, the Lord himself will come down from heaven at the word of command, at the sound of the archangel's voice and God's trumpet. And those who have died in Christ will rise first. Then we, the living, the survivors, will be caught up with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Thenceforth we shall be with the Lord unceasingly. Console one another with this message.
On behalf of all of us gathered here this morning and all those watching, I extend to you, Carmela, to you, Frank Jr., Joanna, and your son, Joey, your husband, Joe, to brother Joe, and all the Rizzo family, our sincere sympathy this time of separation and loss. With the death of Frank Rizzo, that booming voice is silent. The hands that clasped the hands of so many thousands of people he cared for, those feet that carried him for so many years throughout the city that he loved, moved no more. And to Frank Rizzo, family was most important. Carmela, his wife of almost 50 years, his son Frank Jr., his daughter Joanna, and his grandson Joseph Francis, his brother Joe, and all his family were constantly the objects of his love and concern. Throughout his life, he continued to speak with deep reverence and respect of his parents. Family was important to Frank. Frank Rizzo wanted somehow to reach out and help anyone he possibly could with whatever needs they might have. Everyone, in a sense, became a member of his family. And so his extended family was a huge one, and holding a very special place in this extended family were his beloved cops, the men and women of the Philadelphia Police Department. They are truly, in a special way, his brothers and his sisters.
Lord, accept this sacrifice we offer for our brother Frank on the day of his burial. May your love cleanse him from his human weakness and forgive any sins he may have committed. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Holy, holy, holy Lord, holy, we adore thee, Christ Redeemer King, thou art Lord of heaven, thou to whom we sing. Father, in us come, bearing gifts of praise. Son of Adam, still thou art, Savior to our race.
If I may be permitted to say just a few personal words concerning Frank Rizzo, though in no way could I embellish the beautiful words of Father Skelly as he spoke about his dear friend. The gospel of today gives us the assurance that while Frank Rizzo's heart stopped beating on Tuesday, Frank Rizzo went on living. If anyone believes in me, even though he dies, he will live, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Frank Rizzo lives in heaven, but he also lives in our memory. And each of us has his or her memory of him. In the short time that I came to know him, I have recognized the legacy he bequeathed, a legacy of love of his God, of his church, of his family, of Philadelphia, and of every individual in the community. Frank Rizzo is in peace now and was in peace here on earth. Whether as police commissioner or mayor or ordinary citizen, he was a man of compassion, a caring man who touched and stayed in touch with what St. Francis called the little people. As their servant, he is known to have responded to each and every call made to him for assistance. For so many, he was God's answer to the call of the needy, praying to God for help.
Take you to himself.
I'm Jane Robileau. The hot July sun beat down on the hundreds of people gathered outside the basilica. They were not here to take part in the funeral mass inside the church, only to be present and counted as people who cared about Frank Rizzo, because he cared about them.
I liked Frank Rizzo when he was mayor of this city, and I think it's a great loss to the city of Philadelphia.
They all have stories, even the people who didn't know Frank Rizzo personally. But those who did know Frank Rizzo tell me that he would have loved what's going on today. Rocco Dana was the bailiff when Frank Rizzo was the inspector. They're both South Philly boys, and Rocco always carries a picture, a reminder of sweet days gone by.
Every morning he invited me upstairs for coffee. Every morning. He didn't miss a morning. He didn't say, send for me downstairs to go upstairs and have a cup of coffee with him.
They supported Frank Rizzo for mayor and forever. The hero of many touched their lives deeply. He gave them identity.
In South Philly at 12th and Dickinson, and I approached him. He put his arm out, extended his arm out, and shook my hand, and put his arm around me, and I felt like $1 million. And he said to me, it's guys like you that helped put me in. I miss him. I really do miss him.
And thousands of other people will miss him too.
Hundreds lined up on Broad Street in the heat. Doctors, laborers, standing side by side. The working people at Broad and Olney stopped together, straining to see the mile of lights that would bring the body of Frank Rizzo past them.
Frank Rizzo was a very strong male image for the whole city, for the youth.
Didn't really hit me till now. Officers saluted. The Rizzo family waved to the crowd and people waved back. Some we heard saying, "Goodbye, Frank," as the hearse passed. It was as if they'd said goodbye to a close friend. A few said they knew the former mayor well. Some said Frank Rizzo had done them a favor they'd never forget. Some had been able to shake the man's hand, but most only knew what they heard and what they'd seen in the news over the years.
It was sad. A lot of people loved him. Even though some people disagreed with him, they still agreed that he loved the city of Philadelphia.
I said goodbye. There won't be another one like him. There'll never be another Frank Rizzo again.
And when the procession passed, people lingered for a moment, even in the grueling heat, as if to record this memory for all time, a memory to tell their children about. At Broad and Olney, Luann Kahn, Channel 10 News.
He was always a friend, and he was always a guy that commanded the most incredible loyalty that you can imagine. So that his funeral, really, with that tremendous outpouring of love and affection and support and sense of loss, etc., was really a reflection of the role that he played in Philadelphia, which made him the outstanding Philadelphia politician of this century.
He was always helping people. There wasn't a day of my life that I had contact with my father that I didn't see him helping someone with a problem, helping someone life be better. Totally committed to helping people.
What an outpouring of emotion for Frank Rizzo. And it continued the next day at the Holy Sepulchre Cemetery in Cheltenham, where Channel 10's Harvey Clark found people who just couldn't say goodbye to Frank Rizzo.
Flowers still cover the grave of Frank Rizzo at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, and people stop by all day long to see where the man who seemed bigger than life had been laid to rest.
It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe because he was so big, and you don't think that he could die. How could he die?
Today, they didn't come by the thousands. They trickled in one by one. Much of Philadelphia is still unable to say goodbye to Frank Rizzo. Frank Rizzo is surrounded by his family, the Sosonis, the Kellers, the Silvestris, the Picos.
Got Frank in here, then Sosoni, that was his sister-in-law, and Keller is his brother-in-law, but he's married to Eva.
And you are?
I'm a Pico.
You're a Pico.
See how this come about? At one time they used to put the mausoleums up, okay? Then they did away with it and the family took this whole plot over.
Some people just stood in silence with their own private thoughts. Some people said a prayer. Others brought young children by and told them who Frank Rizzo was. Rose Marshall was an old friend who knew Frank for years.
I was there talking, hi there, Frankie, you old fart. You know, like I talk to him. I don't talk to people, you know, different. I talk regular.
It is beginning to sink in. Frank Rizzo is dead. But it will be years, if ever, before people can erase the picture of the man who simply loved them back.
Just a few minutes ago, we heard about Frank Rizzo's deep religious faith. It was primary election night, 1983, when Frank Rizzo was going down in defeat to Wilson Goode, that Channel 10's Sherry Bank asked Frank Rizzo about the power of prayer.
Do you say prayers at night?
Sherry, I always thank God for every blessing I have, and I do it every night.
What did you say last night?
I didn't ask God to let me win. I just thank him for taking good care of me and my family, and I just thank him for everything he's done for me and my family. I wouldn't ask him to help me politically. If I can get him down to vote for me.
Once again, that great Rizzo sense of humor, and for all of his tough talk about crime, Rizzo had a soft spot in his heart for animals and his own pets. Channel 10's Terry Ruggles has that side of the life of Frank Rizzo.
It was a side of Frank Rizzo only a few ever saw. The man who spent years building a reputation for being hard on crime was a softy when it came to animals.
May I come up the driveway through the curtains, his little brown eyes, you know, black eyes actually, but he was such a pal. You know.
In a recent interview, Rizzo fought back tears when he told Diane Allen about his Irish Terrier that had cancer and the 6-year battle to keep the dog alive.
It cost me a lot of money to keep him alive. If I told you how much, you wouldn't believe me. But that didn't matter to me. I would have sold everything I own to have him around.
Frank Rizzo's love for animals can be seen around the city. When Rizzo was mayor, he brought back the mounted patrol, which had been abolished by a previous mayor for budget problems. It was Frank Rizzo who made sure the Canada geese stayed in Fairmount Park all year. He kept them fed and protected. like the time in the early 70s when an oil spill was coming down the river.
It was wild.
Fremont Park Commissioner Bill Mifflin remembers the night Rizzo sent floodlights and a crew to the river to try and save the geese.
It was almost a Keystone Cops comedy where we were chasing the geese out of the water, trying to capture them. So I guess we wore out the geese that they really took off and flew to the other side.
You knew about the public Frank Rizzo, the man who was for law and order. Now you know about the private Rizzo, the man who was for the birds and a lot of other animals. Terry Ruggles, Channel 10 News.
They'd be on the way to work in the mayor's car, and he'd see a stray dog on the drive that was out in the rain, and he'd say, "John, pull over." And they'd open the back door, and you know, some of these dogs were family dogs, and as soon as they'd see a car door open, they'd run in. So he was smart enough to always try that as his first trick, open the door. And he said, poor John said, we'd have this dog dripping wet all over the back seat of the car, but he loved animals.
We used to go there on Saturdays. He would say, "I'm going to show you guys something. You're not going to believe this. You probably don't think I can go out there and call these animals and they'll come." And we said, "Oh, come on, Mayor, you know, you're kidding us." He said, "No, I'm going to show you." He said, "I'm really St. Francis of Assisi." He said, "That's who I really am." And he went out, and we went out with him, and he stood in the middle of his yard, and he put his two arms out like this, and he yelled, "Crows, crows." And unbelievably, there must have been 6 crows, big crows, came right down, right at his feet and stood there. I couldn't believe it. And he said, now you believe me with the birds, I'm going to show you something else." And he walked back to these bushes that were in the back of his house, right above the driveway. And he said, "There's a friend of mine that lives in there who will come out when I call him." And he said, "Raccoon, raccoon, come out. Come here, raccoon. I want you to meet my friends." Nothing happened. About a minute later, we hear this rustling, and this raccoon walks right out from those bushes, stands right in front of Frank, and gets up on his hind legs. It was unbelievable.
And yet another side to Frank Rizzo, the stand-up comic. That's right. In the middle of his campaign for mayor in the summer of 1991, Rizzo found himself on stage at Philadelphia's Comedy Club with the other candidates for some political humor.
There once was a man named Rendell, whose ambition no one could quell. He's got such a yen, he's enrolled now at Penn, taking campaign 101 with Burrell. I enjoyed it. I'll say hello to my good friend Harry Katz and all you nice people. I enjoyed it very much for a great cause, and I've had a great evening. Thank you very much.
Most people never saw that side of Frank Rizzo in person. Publicly, he loved to be viewed as a tower of strength. Privately, he was a sensitive, loving husband and father whose personal acts of charity and caring were legendary in the police department and City Hall. Frank L. Rizzo, outspoken, controversial, obsessed with Philadelphia, the city he loved. But most of all, Frank Rizzo will be remembered as a man who embodied the very essence and vigor of life itself. For Channel 10 News, I'm Larry Kane.
No pushing, no pipers, no drugs, not here, no pushing.
I enjoyed it very much. We're a great cause, and I've had a great evening. Thank you very much.
We won't forget that it was on this night, May 21st, 1991, that we, the citizens of Philadelphia, picked ourselves up, dusted ourselves off, and now stand ready to make this city work for all of us.
When they begin to charge us, when they begin to throw stuff, we're going to take them on. Yes.
Nobody died. Nobody burned Philadelphia down.
I pledge you this administration will do everything humanly possible to see to it that anyone will be able to operate a business without fear.
Blacks are going to vote black.
So you say in response?
That I say in response, the whites will vote for Rizzo along with many other blacks that think like I do.
I'm going to seek election for 1 term, 4 years. And then I will retire to my home with my family, my wife, my children, my grandson, and my dog and parrot.
Oh, come on now. Give me one kiss now. Come on. Give me another kiss. Come on.
The Rizzo Years has been a special presentation of Channel 10 News. WCAU-TV's portion of the proceeds from the sale of this videotape will benefit the Archdiocese of Philadelphia Catholic Charities in accordance with the Rizzo family's wishes. Additional copies of the Rizzo Years can be purchased for $19.95 plus $2.50 shipping and handling. Call toll-free 1-800-843-0048 or send check or money order to The Rizzo Years, Post Office Box 4522, Philadelphia, PA 19131.